Sorry about that, babe.
The Sword of Hope. This is a game that I've been meaning to get around to for the last few years, and we finally conquered it on stream right here on YouTube. Now, I'll be honest, I hadn't really heard of this game until maybe 2020 or so, but when I did, I was delighted to know that it was developed by Kemco and published by Seika, and genuinely looked like a mixture of Shadowgate and an RPG. I mean, what else could I even ask for? The Sword of Hope is a role-playing adventure game that was released in North America in June of 1991 for the Nintendo Game Boy. For the purpose of my playthrough, I utilized the Super Game Boy 2. The brief overview of the story is as follows. You assume the role of the main character named Theo, who happens to be the son of King Hennessy, thus making Theo Prince Theo. Unfortunately, Theo's father, the king, has gone a little off the rails with power, enslaving his kingdom, exiling wise men, and so forth. King Hennessy went so hard that he even killed his wife, Theo's mother, Queen Remy. Luckily for us, Theo was rescued before he could be executed by an old man sage. Having grown up and trained, it is now time for Theo to gear up, level up, and take down his diabolical father. Graphically, I have to admit, the Sword of Hope is pretty nifty. It manages to capture that look and feel of games like Shadowgate, Uninvited Deja Vu, while being on a handheld device and that of the Game Boy. The environments look pretty nice, there's a lot of cool sprite work, even if some of the enemies are a bit on the goofy front, and the portraits of various characters such as the Shaman, Camus, and others you find along the way are quite detailed and almost haunting in a way. For example, the way Camus looks is just, I don't know, kind of mystifying. Now, don't get me wrong, the graphics aren't the best thing I've ever seen, but given the fact that this was a 1989 release in Japan and on the Game Boy, overall it's quite impressive. Music and sound. Musically, The Sword of Hope is quite good. Again, limited a bit by the console that it's on, I feel it does a pretty good job overall. Of course, there aren't many epic songs that are like 5 minutes long or anything, but I do feel like the tracks do a good job of conveying both the area that you're in, as well as the overall mood and tone of the story and progression of the game. Many of the tracks are very Shadowgatey, like the title theme, which means the atmosphere is there in droves. My personal favorite track is that of the endgame dungeon area, which is looping on this review, and another that you hear quite frequently when visiting the Shaman. It's equal parts hopeful and foreboding. As far as the sound effects go, the ones for the attacks, spells, and the like, they're not groundbreaking, but you know what, they do their part. Controls. By nature, these types of games just have clunky controls. With it being so similar to that of Shadowgate, you need to go in certain directions in order to advance the scenery, then choose from a variety of options like look, open, hit, use, and magic in order to interact with your scenery further. At times you could certainly misclick when not being on the ball, and the menu system, though almost second nature to me at this point, can be a bit clunky and cumbersome for a newer player not familiar with the whole Kemco Seika library. I find that the turn-based random encounter battles are fairly easy to navigate with generally traditional menuing. And overall, the controls I guess are somewhat of a mixed bag, but not too bad. Gameplay and fun factor. Alright, let's get into the real meat of the matter. As mentioned, The Sword of Hope is a mixture of an adventure game and an RPG. So with that being said, there's more than just random encounters. Sometimes you're left to explore and utilize items, spells, and various actions to interact with environments in order to proceed further into the game. A great example of this is early in the game when you could look at the trees and they will talk to you, giving you information on where to go, what to do, and extra lore. Or, pardon the visual spoiler here in the review, but sometimes you have to hit or open things in order to find passageways. It's a pretty cool element that sets The Sword of Hope apart from just a regular old RPG. It is encouraged to exhaust all options when exploring, otherwise you might miss something. But with that being said, be prepared for some repeated meaningless dialogue such as when you try to check or look at most walls. The RPG elements that are present are quite bare bones. Encounters are oftentimes shown on the movement HUD by using filled circles next to the general directions. Basically, if you move into a circle, there's going to be a fight. Also, sometimes you could have a seemingly random encounter pop up at will. The battling is quite rudimentary. Attacking, magic, using items, turn-based, so on and so forth. Nothing really different from my perspective from a traditional RPG. However, it is worth noting that enemies can oftentimes hit each other, which I found to be a pretty interesting mechanic and it could sometimes dig you out of a hole. Another thing worth mentioning is the teleport mechanic, which could fast travel you to certain areas such as the Shaman, who could heal you and give you a password, the Old Man, who could offer up advice throughout the game, as well as other areas that you find along the way. Now, the Sword of Hope's weaknesses also tend to lie in this general category. Let's go over those briefly. The random encounter rate can be wildly inconsistent. You can go many screens and directions with nothing, and then sometimes you could literally be landlocked on a screen for something like 5 turns in a row. It can be quite ridiculous at times. Another annoyance lies within the battle system, such as the inconsistent damage output that I found throughout the game, mostly with physical attacking. Legitimately, you can attack an enemy with a single-digit HP loss, and then the very next turn will do 35, and that's without it being any form of a crit. Overall, I found it to be kind of random and kind of annoying. And that's not even mentioning certain enemies, such as the late game clerics, who will just continue to bombard you with awful spells, suck your MP, HP, and have an annoying HP threshold that usually means they can't be one-hit KO'd despite your level. Sure, some of this stuff is a bit nitpicky, but I did want to mention it anyway because it did annoy me during my playthrough. Perhaps the biggest issue with the Sword of Hope is that I feel the game has pretty inconsistent and downright bad pacing at times. I feel like the story just kind of floats around and goes off when it wants to, and coupled with that is a very inconsistent and poor translation that I personally found it continued to get worse as the game went on. It is very clearly a game that was Japanese and later translated into English, probably utilizing the B team for translation. Oftentimes you'll find instances of just strange dialogue where clearly things were just lost in translation. It does hurt the game considerably when trying to convey an epic journey. You don't want to be laughing when something is supposed to be serious. Though, in a way, I guess it sort of gives it some charm? I don't know, but either way, objectively, it's not very good. In summation, I find the best way to sum up the Sword of Hope is it was a very innovative idea, an interesting blend of genres with some poor execution. I feel like this game could have been an absolute legendary entry on the Game Boy, but between the wildly inconsistent encounter rates, downright annoying enemies and areas at times, and pretty awful translation, the Sword of Hope is rather hindered and held back from what it should have been. I do hear that the sequel is considerably better, and that is good to hear, but before I make any judgment on that, I have to get to it myself at some point in the near future. But wrapping back around to the first entry, I give the Sword of Hope a 6 out of 10. I did not feel that I wasted my time with this game, as it did have some nice graphics, nice tunes, good adventure elements and puzzles, and I was wanting to play. I was not dreading streaming it. But overall, the good does get weighed down a bit by the things that I already mentioned a bunch of times now, so I don't want to go over that again. And I'm just left wondering what could have been. I will say this though, if you do like unique games, I do say give it a go. But otherwise, I'd recommend playing another RPG if you want that experience. And if you want an adventure experience in the same vein, just play Shadowgate. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you'd like to check out my first ever playthrough of the Sword of Hope, I will leave the link in the pinned comment, description, and end screen for you. Hopefully you enjoyed this review, and enjoy the playthrough, and I'll see you guys in another video. Take care.